Hmm.
Have you ever thought to yourself, man, I would love to play Counter-Strike with a controller? Nah, it's not gonna work. Have you ever thought to yourself, man, I would love to play the original Deus Ex with a controller? Nah, it doesn't work either. Have you ever thought to yourself, man, I would love to play Civ 5 with a controller? Okay. See, this is the problem with the Steam controller. Valve is trying to answer this imaginary question of trying to bring PC gaming to the living room where, like, okay, I have this DualShock 4, it works alright, for console games, and I have a mouse back there that's great for mouse games and PC games, but you just can't have both with this. I mean, it's like trying to attach a Wiimote to a fight stick or something. I don't know. It's like no game is designed with this controller in mind. It just feels like this weird compromise thing. It's really, really weird. But anyway, let's look at the design of this thing, because this thing, despite its flaws, is actually designed pretty well. So we have this weird combination matte and glossy finish where it's like your hands are all over the matte bits, so the glossy bits stay a little bit shiny. There are some fingerprints there, but you know, what are you going to do? It gets some use. You have these two gigantic touchpads, and you have to kind of get the posture with this thing right. You have to sort of curve your thumbs, and so it's as precise as possible. The buttons are down here, which is kind of weird in a Wii U gamepad sort of way, but you know, works alright. Just got to get a feel for it. It has this very concave design, but it actually works. It's actually not that bad once you get used to it. Analog stick, fairly standard analog stick there. Steam button, start and select. Bumpers, a couple triggers in the back, and two paddles right here. And you can map these to different buttons. You can map this to the A button and the X button. You can map this to different commands if you're playing a PC-only game. And if you hit this switch here, you can pop this off, and it reveals the batteries along with some FCC information. And for what it's worth, these are the batteries that came with the thing, and I've never had to change them in the 2 or 3 weeks that I've had this thing. So very, very nice power consumption there. A lot better than my DualShock 4, which is lucky to last a couple days. With all that said, though, I'd really much rather use this for most situations. It just feels better, fits the hands. And let's talk about why I would much rather use this, and why certain games work better than others with this thing. Thankfully, it does have one saving grace that I hope Valve implements more in the future. You can change the controls from Steam itself. For example, let's look at Final Fantasy VII. It is possible to play this game with a normal gamepad, but trying to fiddle with it is a real pain in the ass. However, I can plug in the Steam controller, set bindings, or find a really good set of bindings really easily, and that's it. Older console ports that don't support controllers, like Star Wars Battlefront 2 or Mass Effect, or even newer finicky games like Undertale, are fantastic with this thing. In fact, Battlefront 2 handled surprisingly well, and I was able to hold my own in this big chaotic firefight against AI stormtroopers. However, for every Battlefront 2, I ran into another game that was terrible with this controller. You may or may not have been able to tell, but a good chunk of my Fallout 4 review was recorded with the Steam controller, and well, let's just say that I spent a lot of time in VATS. This right trackpad takes a lot of effort to learn and master, and even then it's not nearly as good as a mouse. I think that's just a basic human flaw. Your thumb is massive and greasy, and it's not going to move as smoothly across this pad as well as your hand on a mouse pad. When you use a mouse, there's so much nuance in not only your fingers, but also your wrist and arm that you just can't replicate on a tiny pad like this. Hell, I'd argue that using a regular controller is actually a bit better than using the Steam controller when it comes to shooters, because at least you aren't going to mess up your aim by moving your greasy, sweaty thumb just a little bit. Now you do have the option of using the controller's motion sensor to aim, Metroid Prime Trilogy style. However, as this Counter-Strike footage is showing, it's still not perfect. The little aiming cursor doesn't move at all, which means that to turn 180 degrees, you need to awkwardly move the mouse to reorient yourself after physically turning, and all that effort for a control scheme that still isn't as elegant as a mouse. I also tried the recent Deus Ex Revision mod, and the results were largely the same. I do think that it's insanely cool that I was able to map out a lot of the functions and abilities to the gamepad's buttons and analog stick, but again, this thumbpad is just too inaccurate. I got through the tutorial level okay, but in some of the later missions, I have a feeling that this won't cut it. My next test was Metal Gear Solid 5, a game that I actually reviewed on a gamepad. I feel that because of this game's perspective, and also because I was already used to Metal Gear Solid 4's control scheme at that point, a gamepad is actually a pretty plausible choice for this game. And indeed, I got all the way to the true ending with it. When I hopped down for a side mission with the Steam controller, though, I started feeling those aiming woes again. And it's not just that. Issuing commands to D-Dog was also a pain. You gotta push the right pad down, and it actually requires more force than you would think. And when you push it down, it kinda moves your thumb, leading to even more aiming problems. Games that rely on weapon wheels, like this, or something like Arkham Knight, are just about impossible with this thing. But enough griping about the right trackpad. Let's gripe about the left one instead. Next up was Shovel Knight. You control our hero by clicking the left trackpad, again requiring a bit more force than usual, and moving your thumb in the direction you want to go. It actually works better than I expected, but when I switched back to my DualShock 4, it felt more comfortable. Hell, I felt more comfortable playing this game on the Steam controller's analog stick, and I usually hate playing 2D games that way. Rocket League and Dark Souls, not requiring either trackpad, worked well, but at that point you may as well just use a normal controller. Dark Souls was enough of a mess to make rebinding with a controller really helpful, but that can be fixed with more mods anyway. My last test was one of the PCest PC games of all, Civilization V, and it actually isn't that bad. Of course, it's a turn-based strategy game, but being able to sit back and use the thumbpad to order troops around is pretty great. The default bindings are well thought out and flow nicely. Still, I wasn't as efficient or quick as I typically am with a mouse and keyboard. That, and playing this game on a faraway television, isn't ideal anyway because of low font sizes. There's also one other huge flaw. It only works with Steam games. Unless I go through the effort of adding my GOG library to Steam one at a time, it's off limits. The thumbpads, the customization, everything. That's doubly so for Origin games, which don't work unless you add them to Steam in a weirdly specific way, and I just couldn't be bothered. Battlefront 2 works pretty well, but I wouldn't trust this thing to get me through a game of Walker Assault if my life depended on it. In conclusion, the Steam controller does a lot of really cool things. I admire Valve for trying to bring PC gaming into the living room and trying to find a compromise, but it is just that. It's a compromise. And in 90% of situations, I'd really rather use this thing. And it's not without complete merit. I love the idea of being able to use community-made bindings and being able to bind controller buttons. A lot of games don't support that, and the Steam controller does, and that is friggin' awesome. But at this stage, and at this point in me trying to get used to it, it's just not working for me, and I would much rather use this thing than this thing. So that's the Steam controller. If you're looking for a controller on PC, I would recommend getting a 360 pad or a DualShock 4 instead of this, but if you like being able to rebind controllers, you could do worse than this. And I guess it comes with a copy of Rocket League, so that's something, I guess.